I never thought I'd be the kind of person to plot revenge against my own family. But sometimes life pushes you past the point of reason. Sometimes the people you love mistake your kindness for weakness. And when that happens, you either let them walk all over you or you remind them who they're dealing with. So tell me, was I wrong for what I did? My son-in-law decided that since I just retired and bought a little house in the woods, I should share it with his parents without even asking me first. He told me flat out that his parents were moving in, and if I didn't like it, I could come back to the city. I didn't argue. I didn't yell, but I did prepare a surprise that they would never forget. Let me start from the beginning. I worked 40 years as a mechanical engineer. Long hours, deadlines, overtime that bled into weekends. My wife passed away years ago, and after that, the only thing that kept me going was the thought of finally retiring and finding peace. I wasn't looking for luxury, I wanted quiet. I wanted to wake up and hear birds, not traffic. To walk outside and breathe pine instead of smog. So, when I found a small cabin tucked into the Wyoming woods, just under an hour from Cody, I knew I'd found my sanctuary. Buying that cabin was the proudest moment of my life. It wasn't big, just a single bedroom, a little kitchenette, a porch that faced the mountains, but it was perfect. I paid for it in cash, money I'd saved over decades of skipping vacations and working holidays. It was supposed to be my reward. My place of peace. My daughter, Bula, was thrilled for me. She's always been supportive, and she'd inherited her mother's warmth. She lives in Denver with her husband, Cornelius. Now, I've never said this out loud to her, but Cornelius, let's just say he's always rubbed me the wrong way. The man's polite enough to my face, but everything he does seems to come with strings attached. He's a businessman, corporate type, always chasing promotions, always talking about efficiency. I think he sees people as assets, not humans. Still, for my daughter's sake, I tolerated him. When I moved into the cabin, it felt like stepping into another world. I still remember my first morning there, the smell of coffee, the sound of wind through the trees, the sight of elk grazing beyond my porch. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I was just free. I even joked to Bula on the phone that I might never come back to civilization. She laughed and said she'd visit soon. Everything felt right. Then 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Cornelius. His voice was calm, businesslike, as always. "Hey, Dad," he said, even though I've never liked him calling me that, my parents lost their house. Some financial stuff went bad. They'll be staying with you for a couple of months until they get back on their feet. I blinked. "Excuse me, they'll move in Friday," he continued like it was already decided. "They need somewhere peaceful, and your cabin's perfect. Don't worry, they'll bring their own groceries." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "Cornelius, I bought this cabin for peace, for privacy. I barely have room for myself." He sighed. "Come on, it's just for a while, and if it's that big a problem, you can come back to Denver for a bit." And then he hung up. Just like that, I sat there for a long time staring at the trees. The silence that had felt so soothing now felt heavy. My heart was pounding. For 40 years, I'd done everything by the book, worked hard, kept my mouth shut, avoided conflict. I'd always been the peacemaker. But that night, sitting in my little cabin with the sound of wind scratching the windows, I decided I was done being walked over. I didn't sleep. I just sat at the table with a pad of paper, jotting down ideas. I wasn't thinking about revenge, not yet. I was thinking about respect, about boundaries, about how to remind people that not everything is theirs to take. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I drove into town. I stopped by the ranger station first, pretending to be a nervous newcomer. "I just bought a place near County Road 14, I said. "Anything I should know about wildlife around here?" The ranger smiled. Friendly guy in his 40s. "Beautiful area. But yeah, you want to be careful. We've had wolf sightings lately. They're shy usually, but don't leave food out. They got a strong sense of smell." "Wolves," I repeated. "Interesting." I made sure to sound curious, not excited. He gave me a pamphlet about bear and wolf behavior. "Just keep your property clean," he said. "Don't attract them and you'll be fine." "Got it," I said, tucking the pamphlet into my jacket. My next stop was an outdoor supply store. "I'm setting up some security cameras," I told the clerk, "for wildlife monitoring." He showed me a few models, motion, activated night vision connected by cellular network. "These work great," he said. "Lots of folks use them for bears or coyotes." I bought 2. Paid cash, then I went to the butcher shop. "Got any beef scraps?" I asked. "Fet trimmings or the wildlife." For the butcher raised an eyebrow. "Feeding wolves. Just trying to see what's out there," I said with a smile. He didn't ask more questions. Back at the cabin, I set everything up with surgical precision. One camera faced the driveway, one toward the front porch. Both hidden, both synced to my phone. Then, in the clearing behind the cabin, about 30 yards from the building, I laid out the bait. 3 neat piles of raw meat, strategically spaced. The smell hit me instantly, thick and iron, heavy in the cool air. I double-checked the wind direction to make sure it would carry the scent toward the forest. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just setting the stage. If Cornelius's parents wanted to stay in my cabin in the wild, they'd get the full experience. That night, I packed a bag, locked the doors, and drove back to Denver. My old house there was mostly empty, but it had internet, and that's all I needed. I set up my laptop, opened the app linked to the cameras, and waited. Friday morning at exactly 10 o'clock, the driveway camera pinged. A silver sedan pulled up. Out stepped Leonard and Grace, Cornelius's parents. Leonard's a big man, always acts like he's the smartest in the room. Grace is quiet but judgmental, the type who looks at your furniture and calls it quaint, with a smirk. Through the camera mic, I could hear them. "This is it?" Grace said, wrinkling her nose. "It's smaller than I expected. Least it's free," Leonard muttered. "Let's get inside. Maybe it's better in there." They walked up the steps toward the porch, and then Grace froze. Leonard, she whispered from the edge of the trees. 3 gray wolves emerged. They weren't attacking, just moving slow, powerful, graceful. They followed the scent of the meat, heads low, eyes locked. Grace screamed. Leonard stumbled back. Get in the car, he yelled. Now, the 2 of them scrambled back to the set end, tripping over each other in panic. The car doors slammed. The engine revved. They reversed down the driveway so fast that gravel sprayed across the porch. The wolves didn't even chase. They just continued toward the bait, sniffing, feeding, completely uninterested in the humans who dared to trespass. I sat back in my chair in Denver, coffee in hand, watching the whole thing on my laptop screen. I didn't smile, not exactly. But I felt something settle in my chest, something that had been twisting there for years. Peace. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Cornelius, what the hell did you do? He shouted before I could even speak. My parents nearly got attacked by wolves. Wolves? I said innocently. Out there. Well, that's the wilderness for you. Don't play dumb, he snapped. You set this up. You baited them. You, Cornelius, I said calmly. I live in wolf country now. You decided to send your parents into the woods without asking me. If they're too fragile for nature, maybe they should have stayed in the city. You're insane? He growled. You could have gotten them killed. Funny, I said, I thought you were the one who put them in danger by sending them somewhere you knew nothing about. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he said, this isn't over, and hung up. I leaned back and looked at the screen again. The wolves were gone now. The meat piles picked clean. The cabin stood quiet, untouched, just like before. Now, before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have let them move in, turned your hard-earned peace into someone else's crash pad? Or would you have reminded them, like I did, that every action has consequences? Comment below before I finish, because this part gets even better. A week passed before I heard from below. Dad, she said carefully, Cornelius told me about the wolf thing. What happened? I took a deep breath. Nothing happened, honey. I told him this place is in the wilderness. There are wolves. That's nature. She hesitated. You didn't, do anything to scare them, right? I paused for just a moment, long enough for her to notice. Bula? I said softly. Sometimes people only learn respect when they're reminded that the world doesn't revolve around them. There was silence. Then, quietly, she said, I understand. A few days later, Cornelius called again, this time much calmer. They're fine, he said. They're staying with a friend for now. I guess I should have asked before assuming. That would have been nice, I replied. He sighed. You made your point. I wasn't trying to make a point, I said. I was trying to protect my peace. He didn't respond. But from that day forward, he never tried to control me again. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my cabin. The air smelled clean again. The elk were back in the clearing. I fixed up the porch, built a small bird feeder, and finally finished the book I'd been meaning to read for years. It was quiet, peaceful, and most importantly mine. I still think about that morning sometimes, watching the wolves through my camera. How effortlessly nature restored the balance that people had tried to disrupt. I didn't harm anyone. I didn't scream or threaten. I just let the forest remind them that peace is not something you take from someone else. It's something you earn and something you respect. You know, there's a funny thing about silence. Most people can't handle it. They need noise, conversation, validation. But for me, silence is where I found myself again. It's where I realized that after a lifetime of doing for others, I finally had the right to do for myself. When I told my neighbor and Cody about what happened, without all the gory details, of course, he laughed and said, so you let nature teach the lesson, huh? Exactly. I said, nature has a way of setting things straight. So was I wrong for what I did? Maybe it was manipulative. Maybe it was cruel, but it worked and nobody got hurt. Not really. All I did was introduce a few entitled people to the reality of the world beyond their comfort zone. If you ask me, that's not revenge. That's balance. So what do you think? Would you have done the same in my place? Or would you have let your peace be trampled in the name of family? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you were on my side, hit that like button. Subscribe to Life Tales for more stories like this. Stories about real people, real emotions, and the lessons we learn the hard way. Share your final thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never let anyone steal your peace. I'll see you all in the next story.